All right. Hey, first off, definitely want to thank AMSys for putting this on. This is a really cool conference, and I definitely dig the venue. So we're going to talk a little bit here about managing your Casper infrastructure. But before we get into that, let's cover some overheads. As he said, I'm manager Seago. I am the president of MacBrained. I also have a day job. Day job is a senior Mac engineer for a Fortune 500 company that has sites worldwide, biotech firm. A little bit more about me. So I'm a father, a husband, president at MacBrained, active PTA in the U.S., and I don't know if they have the same concept here, but it's when the parents contribute to the public school because public schools a lot of times are lacking, and so parents help with fundraising so the kids can actually go on field trips. And essentially, it is a ton of political drama. And to add to that, then also school site council, because, I mean, why wouldn't you double down when you're already full of drama? Then you have the senior engineer, and then the hobbies. Scripting, obviously a hobby of mine. Love tinkering. Love building things, whether it's woodworking or gardening. Gotten into doing aquariums, anything that's not IT, because sometimes we have to unplug and have something else going on that's away from a computer. Of course, Googlebox, Gogglebox, got to watch that. Even though it's hard to get it streaming in the US, you still can. And of course, attempting to tell my wife no, but that rarely works out well. So, here's infrastructure overview. So you get kind of an idea of what I'm trying to do is paint a picture of what the problems are, what the infrastructure looks like, and then how we came about coming up with some solutions for that. And I've given quite a few presentations on scaling JSS infrastructure. And the last time that I gave this presentation, a lot of the Q&A was on my infrastructure as opposed to solving the problems from the infrastructure. So I wanted to spend a little bit more time kind of going over it so you could kind of paint the full picture there. I have 15,000 Mac clients worldwide. They're on network, they're off network. It's normally about a 50-50 split, which adds its own unique problems in itself. I have a scalable infrastructure, so they're all running off of VMs behind a load balancer. As needed, I can spin up more VMs as necessary. I have a admin console off to the side that is not publicly accessible, that's only on the internal network. On all of the JSS secondary servers, those are web apps. Those only have API access. There's no user login, no web GUI. It's all disabled. But it is publicly accessible. And you can see there that the traffic is moving through the DMZ, and I actually have the traffic forwarded through the DMZ over just the port 8443 directly to the load balancer. And yep, and then there's the admin console. Over here, these are what we call JDS servers, but none of these are actually a JDS. That was just a term that we could get behind when we were trying to get them all created. So similar concept to the web apps, right? So you have up there, you have a DMZ infrastructure, you have an internal infrastructure. Instead of a MySQL database that they're sharing, there's an NFS server that they're sharing the same mount point. So they're all serving out the same data. But then you have the redundancy of multiple web apps, Apache servers, and then the scalability as well. So that we can go out as far in width as we need to and spin up additional servers on demand. Then in the DMZ, we have our own interesting little situation where we have the forever data center that's going to be decommissioned, and it just has never, and so the infrastructure is aging, and I can't actually get an NFS mount in the DMZ. So essentially, I have a VM that's acting as an NFS server, and then only 2 web apps, or 2 Apache instances connected to each one of those. These serve out SUS and Casper packages for a majority of the infrastructure. We have a very high population of Macs in South San Francisco, and then we have a high population of Macs out and off network. So all the Macs off network, they're going to go to that DMZ implementation. All of the Macs on the network in the major hotbed where the connectivity is about 100 gig line, they're going to go to that load balance cluster. Aside from that, you have a scenario where there is Mac Minis being used. So in each one of our locations, once we get to, we don't really even have a threshold. It's been brought up many a times where they'd like to have a threshold of what point do we deploy a on-site distribution point for a Mac instance, and that really varies on how important the users are and how many users are there, and how bad that link is maybe to the rest of the corporate network. But the idea is that anywhere where there's Macs, we have a Casper distribution point and we have a SUS server there, so that they don't have to deal with slow downloads, and so imaging doesn't take that long. And we also have redundancy there. One of the trade-offs and one of the selling points when it came to using Mac Minis for this was redundancy and cost. And redundancy, when you're thinking about a Mac Mini, like what are you talking about? There's not double power supplies. How is that even redundant? But there isn't redundant power supplies because it's a whole redundant system. What we have going on is that all the configuration from the one server, one Mac Mini, copies to the other Mac Mini, and they're both live. They have different IPs at the time, but should, for whatever reason, one of those go down or it needs to be mailed back to someone to take a look at or be replaced, or an interesting situation where we randomly wiped out all Casper shares in the entire world. That was special. By the way, replicating nothing happens really quickly. Really quickly. And you end up with I don't think I'm going to make it to dinner, sweetie. That was not fun. But then you have the secondary servers, right? That trade-off for the price, at least in US dollars, you're looking at maybe a little over $2,000, probably less dollars for a fully redundant Mac server. Other reasons to go with Mac in this scenario is familiarity, and for being in a rather large corporation like I am, we have 15,000 Macs. However, there's 100,000 employees. So I think our IT department's 3,500 people. So there's a lot of checks and balances in a lot of different places, and we've been able to embrace the Mac and be able to really own the Mac platform as a whole. And so that also means that we then own that whatever is on those Macs and whatever core OS is on those Macs when they're deployed out to these sites. And that's not the case with the other infrastructure that I was showing you. We're not in control of the core VM, so to speak. We don't actually have root access in a lot of situations. We have application owner access, and we live in the application layer. We don't deal with the core OS. All right. So that brings us to, all right, so we've talked about all this different stuff, but we're managing this Casper infrastructure. What's the problem? What are the drawbacks that we had run into? Because we're not, by no means, we're not the oldest Casper implementation, but we've been doing Casper since Casper 5.0. So there's been a very, very organic creation of this infrastructure as needed. And it only had one owner for a long period of time, and now it's starting to get divvied up into tasks. So the question that we ended up having to ask ourselves is, is our environment healthy? All these things sound really awesome, or maybe not to you, that's fine too, but you have SUS everywhere. SUS is replicating down. Casper Share is replicating down. Everything's in sync. The world's a happy place. But is it? And how are you even going to know if it isn't? Aside from a user complaining because something isn't working, right? Are they replicating correctly? Are they configured the same? These are all home-built systems, hand-built, one at a time. They weren't imaged. There wasn't a script to configure them. They were made on the fly from various people through the years that have very varying skill sets, right? Are they all patched? Yeah. What OS are they running? What's the security layer on them? Is it something even as simple as the server.app up to date, right? These are all questions that we had, and we didn't have something implemented to deal with that. This goes into the everything was hand built. We're up to 39 now worldwide. There's no monitoring on them. If anything, the only monitoring is, does HTTP respond? And that's really not a good telltale sign on whether or not things are working correctly at all. There was no inventory, and more importantly, there was no deployment mechanism. So I was really turning over that problem and looking at it, and in a situation where I'm now separated away from this, right? I built a majority of that infrastructure, but now I've moved on, and I've moved on to a different role, and I'm not day-to-day touching this operations production environment. So I was struggling, and I was like, how am I going to deal with this? And I was just brainstorming and thinking of different ways, because I wanted to get a picture of, I don't know, is it healthy? Is it okay? We haven't had complaints, but is it working correctly? I'm not too sure. And like most things, for any of us that commute long hours, I was stuck in traffic, and like a ton of bricks, it hit me while sitting in traffic. I know how to manage Macs. How is this a problem? I have the infrastructure to manage Macs, and I know how to use Casper. So why am I not using Casper to manage these distribution points, right? So the concept was, why am I not managing Casper with Casper? What's stopping me? What are my problems? And more importantly, for a lot of people in the room, it's going to be, why Casper, right? Now, one, could you use Monkey for this? Absolutely. Why Casper? Already purchased, already there. People already know about it. Operations is already perfectly comfortable with running a Casper environment, so asking them to do this in Casper is not a hard task for them. They're already well aware of how to use this, right? You have the vendor support. Should something go wrong? Should something break? Should you need to get any support whatsoever? You have Jamf to help you with that. A very robust API, and also an API that we're very familiar with doing what we want with, and making modifications. And we do a lot of API calls and policies based off of that. And we also had, with that, the capability of a single dashboard. And I'll show an example of that in a little bit here. But the ability to actually have, not necessarily maybe a single pane of glass, so to speak, but at least an idea of a heartbeat of what in the world is going on with my systems. But all of that just simply throwing a bunch of servers or Mac Minis and enrolling them into Casper isn't really going to give you all that much benefit, right? You're going to get if it's the same as everything else, you're going to end up with a JSS environment that is customized to your clients and client needs. But client needs And what we want to know on the server needs are very different things, right? I don't need an extension attribute for the clients about how big their Casper share is. I don't know. That's not an extension attribute that I need to have. I don't necessarily want everyone that has the capability to set up a policy to have the capabilities of deploying packages to servers or configuring servers. That's not going to work out. So it became pretty clear that I was not going to be able to run all of this on one single Casper instance. That this was going to have to be a separate instance in itself. And there's various parts of Casper that prevented this from happening, all of which I've, of course, put in feature requests for. One, you can't scope extension attributes. These extension attributes would be run on every single system. You can't scope extension attributes. Doesn't matter how you look at it. The policy bit, you could get around that with sites. Sites, you could probably get around that, but definitely not extension attributes. So you come down to the concept that one JSS to rule them all is not necessarily the best thing. And with that, once you've broken that kind of chain of, okay, well now I don't have to worry about what's running on client systems, and my environment's really, really far different than what I'm doing when I'm managing actual systems that for users, you start thinking about it, and it's endless possibilities. You're no longer, now any question that you have about any server whatsoever, you turn into extension attribute. And that's how this all kind of started, as I'd sit there and sure, I have an empty JSS. Well, that's kind of useless. Now what am I going to do with it? I have basic inventory data. Okay, but now what? Okay, well, these systems are all different OSs. They're all varying various patch versions. Okay. Well, why don't I create a policy to just upgrade them? Like, what's stopping me? There's no user. These aren't user systems. These are servers. And if I stagger their install and if I stagger their update, I can set it up so that at midnight in local time, when theoretically no one should be using that server, or even take a maintenance window that no one's going to care about because it's midnight local time, I can now just blast out a create OSX install PKG and reboot that system and come back on the other side with a fully functioning OS. Because now I also have the ability to have smart groups and then policies, and when that new server comes back online, it can check the server.app version, and then it goes into this smart group, and then that server.app version gets updated by a package that gets deployed to it. You start ending up with a much better idea of what's going on in your distribution points, and even this can be definitely used for your JSS servers if you're running a JSS on a Mac as well. So this is the dashboard example, kind of like I was talking about. Kind of rudimentary, but this is built into Casper 9. I can't say that it works awesome when you have a ton of systems in there, but it seems how with 39 Macs, this draws really quickly, comes up. You can have policies, you can have smart groups, and you can have some sort of a dashboard. And just something as simple as reposado sync. Like, what was the last time the repo sync ran on these systems? And if I'm going to run repo sync on these systems and I want to get logging, how am I going to aggregate that logging? Wait. If I turn that into a policy, and now the policy runs on the servers, the Mac Minis, to run repo sync, then I have those logs in the policy history should I need to go back and look at what's going on. You see, one thought leads to another, and slowly it turns into a much more powerful beast. Doing something that unfortunately is one thing that Casper really, really does not do very well. It's a great caretaker, but it never takes care of itself, right? So it can take care of all these other systems in the world, but it doesn't inherently, even when there's a JDS, really give you a good idea of what the health of that JDS is. The most you're going to see is that it's missing some packages, right? You're not going to see anything else about that. There's some inventory data, but it's not actionable. You can't deploy anything. You can't patch anything. But if you separate it out and you have them enrolled, then you can go in and you can actually have these extension attributes. You can see and make sure that the repo sync path is the same on each system. You can see what OS version, which you already could do, but you can then also do things like what's its parent JSS? What's its parent DP? What's its parent SUS? You end up with the ability to do so much more. So like just on here, you can see as a quick overview, right? You're forcing server installs, making sure management frameworks are down, making sure repo sync's running for Reposado so that SUS updates are running correctly. You can set up actually deploying out JDSs, which we'll get into in a little bit, and what that actually looks like. So with all of that, you now have a deployment mechanism and you have a managed system. And so what this takes you to being able to be, which is very beneficial to me in my situation, is that in what we were doing was we were provisioning Mac Minis and then drop shipping them. Whereas now we can have local IT anywhere in the world go to their Apple store or their Apple authorized reseller, and they can actually go out, grab a Mac Mini, and bring it into the environment. And we can say, just go to this enroll page, enroll this system, and we're good. We can take it from here. You've enrolled it, now we can go. Because we've enrolled it in the system, and now we can use those parent JSS and those parent SUS server extension attributes, which are drop-down extension attributes with the options of which site and which server these things connect to. And we can automate, or you could do it through self-service, and here you have a self-service example, but you can now straight just deploy out a JDS installation. You can have the retail OS, just simply have it enrolled with either the recon or the enrollment window, run the policy. And the policy in this situation, which I'll show you essentially the script that it's running, it's nothing really all that fancy. Just a shell script was going up against the API and getting the information that it needs so that it can populate things like parent SUS, what the parent SUS port is, if there's another port, what the parent JSS is, and take that information and use it in the enrollment process. Because then what it can do is it goes out, finds the parent JSS, and now it knows what to feed the JDS installer from the command line when enrolling the system. It can enroll, not only the system is enrolled in the JDS medic, so to speak, or the JSS medic, or the whatever you want to call it. I haven't been able to come up with a cool name yet. But this management for your infrastructure, and it can now enroll in whichever parent JSS you want. In our environment, we have 3 instances at the minimum of JSSs, one for production, one for testing, and then one for engineering as a sandbox. So this is where this comes into some use, is being able to determine, hey, are we testing a workflow and we just want it to go against the test JSS, or are we now in production, right? And with that, going in and not only setting up the JDS on the system, but also setting up SUS based on this. So setting up Reposado and installing the server app and setting up the Samba and the AFP shares, and then posting that information with the API up to the parent JSS. And automating the configuration now, where not only is this system with just one single policy configured, but it's not only is the system configured, but now it's also talking to your environment with minimal input and with automation, essentially, right? Now, you don't have to worry about how these systems are being configured because they're all being configured exactly the same way. They have a host OS, but now we're thin imaging them, right? We're thin imaging these distribution points for lack of a better term. I mean, it might as well be. It could be, you could put this in a dep workflow if you really wanted to, because all it's doing is, okay, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, moving forward, and now I'm a standard. So that works out really well, and that worked out really well for enrolling the systems. New systems, but that's not necessarily good enough. So we made sure that the script could also handle standardizing, so that what we could do with the same exact framework is take those systems that were in various states, and who knows where there were issues. I found some very interesting issues, by the way, once you start reconning these. For instance, I found out that the East Coast hadn't had new updates in 2 years. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, awesome. You get to see that, hey, wow, so I thought my packages were replicating correctly everywhere. Oh, I know that replicating nothing goes everywhere, that's for sure. But replicating something wasn't going everywhere. And you can actually then compare those things. So this standardization was able to bring them back into one central state. I mean, we weren't using JDSs across the board, but in this instance, we were able to not only bring in new systems and provision them one way, but then take the old systems and transfer them over to use the JDS technology for replication. So, that being said, we've talked a lot about Mac. And it all started with Mac, right? But my core infrastructure that the majority of the work happens on, that most of the people have the least experience with in my environment, is Linux. So in the Linux environment, what we already have set up is very similar to what I had just kind of talked about via policy for the JDSs to be configured for years now. I've had the JSS upgrade and the JSS installation and a JDS upgrade or a JDS installation, so to speak, scripted. So anytime that operations needs to reinstall a JSS, they go to a Git repository, they get the version that's up there, they copy it to the server, and then they run it. Well, that works out good, except for did the individual that transferred those files over, did he do a Git pull recently? Is that actually the latest version? Is that a version that I'm still working on? There's a concept of why did he have to transfer those files to begin with? And so all of those things turned into AutoMagic, which, name it whatever. But the concept is that we can take, if everything's already in Git repositories, why are we not leveraging Git repos to just copy directly down to these Linux systems? Git works great on Linux. It's fine. You install it, it's going to rock and roll. What do we really want to get around on this? Well, we talked about human fault tolerance, right? We want to make sure that the correct version of these scripts are being downloaded down. We want to make sure that the correct version, the permissions are correct when they're being brought over. The person has permissions to bring them over. Why should they have to download them to begin with? If we already know this is the one version that you're always supposed to use, and let's be real, the JSS installer is not that large, so if it always existed, that'd be fine. And then we can open up all the other benefits of Git. So the concept behind the auto magic kind of init was this process, and it's kind of similar to how I had done the other install processes in the past. Run a shell script. You run the shell script, and they get prompted for specific information. So they get prompted for the username and the password of the API that they want to use. They get prompted for what environment this is supposed to be. Is this production, development, testing, sandpit? And what type of server this is supposed to be. Then it goes through and installs Git, makes sure that all those dependencies are taken care of, configures Git based on the information that the technician had given it, and then checks out the correct repo, and then clones the correct branch of that repo. And we're going to get into branches a little bit here because they're extremely powerful in this workflow, and I strongly suggest, if you're not already using some form of Git or version control, that you do, especially if you're going to start scripting, and if you're ever going to start collaborating, it's immensely useful. And then setting up a cron job to ensure that on a regular increment, every 30 minutes or so, it's checking to make sure that it has the latest pulls from that Git repo. And that's how the branches for these repos have been set up. So we have the original Git repo, then you have your test branch, your production branch, your sandbox branch, your development branch. Use whatever terminology you want in this, but the concept is that you have the ability to promote code into various environments that will automatically receive this code. And if you want to go a step further, you could have it automatically execute this code if you want to. But in this instance, it was just copying the code over so that it's already existing. There's some situations where I have it actually move scripts over that have become more troublesome. Like one is my JDS handler script, essentially. I have a script that handles the JDS binary on the servers and when it's going to do its replication and when it's going to go out and inventory. And this is the touching of branches. So if you see here, over here there's the master branch, right? And this was just a really good diagram that I had found explaining how you get to different places and where branches are really, really powerful when it comes to development. But when we're using scripts, especially in a nature like this, we're doing a form of development. We're not necessarily programming a huge app, but we're definitely coding. So you have, let's say, over here, you have your master branch, right? So that's your production. That's where you want everyone that is in production should have this, right? So you start with a core version, and then you move it over to development in the development branch, and then you're working on it in the development branch, and you have many, many iterations that you change through because you're testing things, and you're testing things, and you're testing things over there, that yellow column. And in this, they have the concept of feature branches. In what I was using, and with my terminology, it's the concept of the additional environments. I don't know if you just sat through Greg Niegel's presentation, but he had the concept of your test group, your beta group, and your everyone group, and being able to accurately scope where things were going to start changing, and be able to test these things and make sure that you minimize any issues if there is a problem in the code. And then wrapping it all back into a version 1.0. You go through, you make all your different iterations, you make all your changes, and it's really not as hard as it looks. I use source tree. For those of you not familiar with Git at all, it's not the end of the world. You can check out the individual branches. You can commit to the different branches. Let's say you start off and you're in your sandpit environment, so to speak, and that's where you're tinkering and you're tinkering and you're tinkering and you're tinkering. And then you realize what you were doing was horrible, and so you bring back down the production branch and you start over, or you decide that what you think is amazing, and so then you push that up to, let's say, the test branch, because now you want another set of eyes on this to run this, and now that code's over in the test branch. But with this framework, then as soon as you push that new code to the test branch, then all those test servers are going to download that code, and they're going to have the correct version down there when it comes time for someone to then execute that. And once that's approved, then you can easily move that exact same code exactly the way that it's supposed to be, because you have version control. You can see each iteration of each change in each file and push that code to the production environment and then have it all come down. So it's really a great phased approach with the versioning control, with being able to have many hands in the pot of tinkering and adding different changes and then merge and all the different wonderful powers of Git at your disposal. And of course, there's the commits. Commits are always great. I'm notoriously horrible for them. You know, and it begins processing. Bigger, better, faster, stronger, right? But you have that power. And that's something initially that you didn't have. All right, let's hop back over in here. I want to talk real quick about some JDS alternatives, and alternative to the JDS from Jamf. There's a couple big, strong points in the JDS, and that's or at least selling points, so to speak, and that's the concept of its built-in replication. That's really cool. The concept of its built-in HTTP server with server configuration with its, you could do certificate-based authentication. It already has the parent-child built-in replication. We've run into some issues here and there. Through the years, we've also used rsync. Rsync is amazing. It should be in everybody's toolkit. If you're familiar with Windows, it's Robocopy, almost, except better. Pressstore is a commercial software that we've used through the years. It's been very reliable. It's also fairly expensive, but it is absolutely reliable. I've talked to a few different implementations where they use DFS as their prime file replication. And then you can always just for the file share mounting itself. Yeah, I highly recommend having HTTP servers for your policies and then AFP servers for your imaging, or SMB servers for your imaging workflows. HTTP servers, auto-resumable. Yeah, it's definitely the way to go for day-to-day policies, if at all possible. But then when it comes down to actual block copying, that's when you want to get down to having an AFP or an SMB share. And this is a little bit about MacBrained, so I'll talk about that for a little bit. So MacBrained is a Mac and iOS admin community. We're built around the concept of recreating the greatness that happens at these conferences at a more regular pace, right? So we all meet, and we meet people from out of town, or maybe we all live in the same town, but we don't have the time to meet each other. And this is something London Mac Admins does a great job of as well. And that's setting up these meetups and coming together with our friends and with our colleagues and being able to talk about the solutions that we're thinking about or that we're fighting day to day. Because we found that every time we met up with one of our friends at a conference, they would have essentially the same solution that we had, and we both spent 12 hours, 24 hours working on it, whatever it was, to try and figure it out. But we hadn't had time to meet and talk about it. But if we could have shared that information, and if we could have actually worked together, one of us could have cut down that time, or maybe something even better than the sum of both of us could come out of that. And that's a lot of where we're at. You can see us there, our website, macbrain.org. We have Twitter, Google, for whatever reason. I don't know how much longer we'll have that, but Facebook group. And you can see us in Slack as well. And then Q&A.
Does an extra JSS license cost? When you set up the when you set up the second JSS, did you have to pay for an additional license?
No. The JSS is based off a client license. So not even theoretically, you would have to pay for a client license for each one of your servers. However, the server itself, you can have as many servers as you want. That's not their licensing model.
Just behind you there.
There you go.
For your distribution points,
yes.
Say one of the Mac Minis fails for whatever reason, to swap it over to that, is it just you just change the CNAME in DNS and then it take it from
I just
there,
change it on the server itself, yeah.
So you actually change the IP of the server?
Change the static IP on the local system. That would happen quicker than DNS replicating in my company.
Of course.
Yeah.
Cool.
Who's next?
Just about your JDS replication.
Yes.
Do you, I take it you have that automated? You don't go into Casper admin and click on each distribution point and click replicate?
Correct. It's already, so the JDS, you don't have to do it that way. It'll automatically, just built in, do its own replication. I have it set up so it's kind of a handler. So if, going back to the first slides of the JDS infrastructure, that JDS master has an SMB file mount. So that JDS master, so to speak, in that NFS cluster, that is the master distribution point. So that gets mounted and Casper admin uploads files to there. And then there's a handler script that knows, and it's running in a regular increment, that file share has been mounted and that someone has an ops lock on one of the files inside of there. Therefore, I'm not going to run inventory and tell Casper, tell the JSS what files I have. That's really important because if Casper admin is uploading a file and the JDS checks to see and phones home, so to speak, and says, these are the files that I have, the JSS doesn't yet have that new file and that new file's hash in it. So that would be a file that didn't need to belong there, and it will delete it in the middle of your transfer or before you had hit save inside of Casper admin, which we found out a lot from trial and error. And so this basically sits as a watch process and ensures that once the file share has unmounted, now I'm going to run my inventory, and then it tells Casper, the JSS, I have these files, this is their hashes, or we're good. Instead of the other form of replication, if it's built in, if you go Casper, JDS out of the box, you would, if you had a JDS as your master, you would upload the files actually through Tomcat to MySQL and then chunk out back through, the Tomcat being the JSS web app, then out of MySQL back from the web app being deployed down to the first JDS. Yeah. I've never been a fan of that. I actually did try to make it work, but larger packages were an issue and the logging wasn't the best. However, to be fair, Jamf is aware of that and they are working on a new version of the JDS. So hopefully we'll get past these problems.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Where is it? Okay, just have to mind the camera.
Yeah, so watch me on the camera.
Maybe go round a bit.
Hello. I don't mean to digress. It's a Casper and a Git related question. I wasn't sure if you. There was a Gitception thing on Jamf Nation a while back, which was making use of Git to manage extension attributes and scripts. Do you integrate that at all into your JSS in terms of version control of scripts, or?
So I do not have that implemented in my environment. I do have all of our extension attributes in a specific repo, and we do version control based off of that, but I don't have that integrated yet. But like there's absolutely no problem in that whatsoever. And talking about other presentations and other implementations, if Facebook uses Git or has used Git to do a form of replication for scripts and stuff on their client systems as well. And actually talking with Mike Dodge and building out the slides for this, I was like, oh, wow, that's kind of an interesting way of doing it. It sounds really familiar to the way Dodge has been doing it. So there's been lots of different sessions on using Git in different ways. I felt that this was important to share with everyone just to get kind of the brain noodling over the concept of what you could do and going outside the box.
Thank you.
Oh, just need the mic. Hang on. Incoming. Go.
So speaking of Git and sharing, will you be sharing some of the scripts that you've been showing during your presentation?
Yeah, so there's a subset of these scripts that are already posted to my public Git, which is just to Andrew Seago at GitHub. The JDS handler script that I was talking about is up in there. So's, I believe, an implementation, the JDS install script. I need to work on scrubbing those because they're all pretty raw in their form and have things hard-coded into them that would get me fired. So once I sterilize those and get it to a point, my intention is absolutely to publish that out.
Thank you.
Last question from me. What other tools are you looking at? What's next on your list?
Yeah, I've been toying around with the concept, and I'm a firm believer that one is not. You don't necessarily need just one thing. You can use two things. So definitely Monkey, similar to Marco's been doing, and Marco's going to talk about the concept of it's not an or. It doesn't have to be an or conversation. If you can leverage the power behind that, because we do a lot of custom scripting. Well, I guess all scripting is custom, but we do a lot of custom workflows and augmentation onto the JSS, and some of that has built-in functionality within Monkey already.
Cool. Thanks. Right. Any other questions? Don't think so. Good. Okay. That's it. We're done on this one. So thanks, Andrew.
Not a problem.
Very good.